That morning began quietly and without any sense of drama, as the early sky stretched pale and hazy above the empty streets, while I drove across town to the hardware store, arriving earlier than planned because the roads were clear and the air felt cool and calm. And as I parked near the entrance with the engine off and the faint breeze drifting through the half-open window, I settled into the stillness of the nearly deserted parking lot, listening to the distant hum of traffic while the store lights remained dim inside, waiting for opening hours to begin in what should have been an ordinary, uneventful start to the day. As I sat there, leaning back in my seat and scrolling through my phone while the minutes moved slowly forward, the quiet atmosphere wrapped around the space like a soft layer of morning silence, and the glass doors of the store reflected the sleeping sky above, with the bold white letters displaying the opening time of 9 o'clock, reminding me that all I had to do was wait peacefully for a few more minutes before picking up the folding table I had ordered online, a simple task that felt almost too small to remember, yet one that would soon turn into an experience I would never forget. After a short while, a silver SUV rolled into the lot and parked a couple of spaces away from me, and the woman who stepped out of it seemed to carry an air of assertive tension as she stood there, with her iced coffee in hand, her posture stiff and deliberate, her sunglasses reflecting the faint morning light while she scanned the quiet surroundings, with the kind of suspicious intensity usually reserved for situations far more serious than an empty parking lot before opening hours. When our eyes met briefly, I offered a calm, polite nod, the typical unspoken acknowledgement strangers exchange in public places. Yet instead of returning the gesture, she simply stared back at me with a cold, measuring expression, as if my presence there demanded justification, as if merely existing in that space required explanation. And in that moment, the peaceful stillness of the morning began to feel heavier, not because anything had changed around me, but because of the way she looked at me, not as a person waiting for a store to open, but as a problem waiting to unfold. I tried to focus again on my phone, reminding myself that not every uneasy glance means anything significant, but the sensation of being watched lingered like a weight on my shoulders. And when I glanced up again to check the time on the door, seeing that it was still a little before 9, I noticed her standing there with the same rigid posture, arms folded tightly, her gaze locked onto me with a firm certainty that suggested she had already come to a conclusion about who I was and why I was there, even though nothing had actually happened. Without warning, she began walking toward my car, and the sound of her footsteps against the pavement echoed sharply through the otherwise quiet lot, carrying a rhythm that felt more like confrontation than curiosity. And when she reached my window and knocked with firm, demanding taps that seemed to carry the weight of judgment rather than conversation, I rolled it down halfway, maintaining a steady tone as I asked how I could help, even though I already sensed that her intention wasn't simply to ask a question. She looked at me with tightened features and an accusatory tone as she demanded to know what I was doing there, and I explained calmly that I was waiting for the store to open because I had an order to pick up, pointing out the posted opening time and offering to show my confirmation email. Yet instead of easing her concerns, my explanation appeared to deepen her suspicion, as though the very act of waiting quietly before business hours somehow transformed into something threatening in her mind. She insisted that I had been sitting there for a long time and declared that this was private property where I didn't belong. And even when I reminded her that it was a retail parking lot and that I was a paying customer who had every right to wait, she rejected the logic entirely, claiming that I was making people uncomfortable, even though the lot was practically empty and no one else had interacted with me. And in that moment, it became painfully clear that the discomfort she spoke of wasn't about anything I had done, but rather about what she had decided I represented. Before I could respond further, she announced with unwavering certainty that she was calling the police, stating that my presence was suspicious and unsafe. And as she turned away with her phone already in hand, pacing with a sense of moral urgency as if she were performing some heroic duty, I felt that familiar mix of frustration and sadness rising inside me, not because I feared the truth being uncovered, but because of how easily a calm, harmless situation could be twisted into something threatening in the eyes of someone determined to see danger where none existed. I remained still in my seat, keeping my hands visible on the steering wheel as I took a slow breath, not out of fear, but out of weary understanding, knowing that sometimes the more you defend yourself, the more guilty you appear to those who have already made up their minds. And while she continued speaking loudly into her phone, emphasizing words like suspicious and refusing to leave, the surreal nature of the moment settled in, that I was being reported to the police. simply for waiting outside a store before opening hours. A few minutes later, one of the store employees unlocked the front doors and stepped outside to move a display rack, and his casual, sleepy expression contrasted sharply with the tension that had been building around me, and when I asked if they were opening at 9, he nodded with an easy smile, confirming my pickup order and speaking in the relaxed, ordinary tone of someone who saw nothing unusual about a customer waiting in the parking lot before the store opened, a tone grounded in reality rather than imagination. But as he returned to his work, her raised voice sliced through the air as she continued speaking into the phone, declaring to the dispatcher that she felt unsafe and insisting that I was watching the building and refusing to leave. And the employee paused mid-movement, glancing between us with visible confusion as he gently explained to her that I was simply a customer with an order. Yet even when presented with the truth, she clung to her assumptions like armor, dismissing his reassurance and insisting that danger might exist simply because she believed it could. The parking lot seemed to stretch into a strange, suspended moment where logic and paranoia collided, and as the minutes passed, a police cruiser finally pulled into the lot, its presence carrying an undeniable weight that shifted the entire atmosphere, not in a dramatic or cinematic way, but in a deeply human one, the kind where your heart grows heavy not because you've done something wrong, but because you are now required to prove that you haven't. The officer stepped out calmly, his posture measured and professional as he approached my car, and when he greeted me and asked what was happening, I explained once again that I was simply waiting for the store to open and that I had an order confirmation on my phone, which I handed to him while maintaining a respectful, composed demeanor, even though inside I felt the quiet frustration of being placed in a situation I never should have been in. He examined the email, checked the pickup details, and nodded in acknowledgement, confirming aloud that everything matched, and although his tone remained polite and fair, the very fact that my innocence required verification through proof felt like a subtle reminder of how easily suspicion can be manufactured when someone decides to frame ordinary behavior as something threatening. After asking routine safety questions and confirming that I wasn't violating any laws, the officer assured me that I was allowed to wait in the parking lot and that I wasn't doing anything wrong. And while those words were accurate, they didn't erase the emotional weight of being placed under scrutiny for no reason other than someone else's fears, a sensation that lingered beneath the calm surface of the conversation. He then walked over to speak with her, and though I couldn't hear every word, I could see the indignation in her posture as she insisted she had acted responsibly, while the officer explained that waiting quietly in a parking lot before opening hours was not a crime and that her suspicion alone did not justify the escalation she had created. And even as he spoke, her expression remained stern and resistant, as if the existence of fairness itself challenged the story she had already decided to believe. When the officer returned and quietly told me I was free to continue waiting, offering a brief, understanding apology for the inconvenience, I thanked him and watched as he drove away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and reflective rather than peaceful. A silence shaped by the realization that some people carry assumptions so deeply that they are willing to involve law enforcement rather than question their own judgments. A moment later, the clock reached 9, the doors opened fully, and the employee waved me inside with a sympathetic look, and as I walked through the entrance, the inside of the store felt strangely bright and echoing, filled with the smell of wood, cleaning chemicals, and cardboard, while the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, grounding the moment back into normalcy even as the emotional weight of what had happened still lingered. He retrieved my folding table from the back and placed it on the counter, pausing for a moment before handing it over as he quietly apologized again for what I had gone through, his voice carrying a sincerity that eased some of the heaviness. And as I thanked him, we shared a brief but meaningful moment of understanding about how some people see danger where there is none, and how those assumptions can transform harmless situations into something unnecessarily tense. When I carried the box back outside, she was still standing near her SUV with folded arms and a hardened expression, watching me as if waiting for confirmation that her fears had been justified. But I simply placed the table in my trunk, closed it gently, and drove away without confrontation, choosing silence not because I was defeated, but because some moments do not deserve the energy of a response. As I left the parking lot and the store grew smaller in my rearview mirror, I reflected on how an ordinary morning had turned into a moment that revealed something deeply unsettling about how quickly suspicion can replace empathy, how easily fear can override reason, and how a person sitting quietly in a car can become a perceived threat simply because someone chose to interpret reality through the lens of their own anxieties rather than truth. And while the world outside my window slowly returned to normal, the road stretching ahead, the city waking up, the day continuing as if nothing had happened, the memory of that encounter remained, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most unsettling experiences are not loud or chaotic, but subtle and painfully ordinary, unfolding in the space between misunderstanding and assumption. In a parking lot where I was simply waiting for a store to open, yet somehow became the reason someone felt compelled to dial 911.